Eleanor Price was 72 years old, and the only family she had left was a 3-year-old golden retriever named Buddy. Her husband, Thomas, had died 18 months ago after 48 years of marriage. Their 2 children lived on opposite coasts, one in Seattle, one in Boston, with families of their own. They called every Sunday, visited twice a year, and worried about her living alone in the old house on Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Oregon. But Eleanor wasn't ready to leave. Every corner of the house held memories. Thomas's reading chair by the window. The kitchen where they'd cook together every Sunday. The garden he'd spent years perfecting. Moving to assisted living or relocating near the kids meant leaving Thomas behind, and she wasn't ready for that. So she stayed. And she had Buddy, who'd been Thomas's dog originally. Thomas had gotten him as a puppy 2 years before he died, saying he wanted a companion for his daily walks. When Thomas got sick, Buddy had rarely left his side. And when Thomas died, Buddy transferred all that loyalty to Eleanor. The dog was her shadow now. He slept beside her bed, followed her from room to room, sat at her feet while she read. He was her alarm system, her companion, and the reason she got up every morning. Cedar Falls was a small town, population 8,000, nestled in the mountains of southern Oregon. It used to be a quiet, safe place where people didn't lock their doors. But in recent years, things had changed. The opioid crisis had hit hard. Jobs had disappeared. Young people moved away, leaving behind empty storefronts and growing desperation. Crime had crept in. Break-ins mostly, targeting elderly residents who lived alone. The police did their best, but they were understaffed and overwhelmed. People started locking their doors, installing security systems, avoiding going out after dark. Eleanor had installed extra locks and a security camera by her front door. She was careful about routines, varied her schedule for grocery shopping, and always kept her phone charged. She'd read articles about staying safe as a senior citizen living alone. But she refused to live in fear. She still took Buddy for walks every evening at sunset, her favorite time of day. The neighborhood was quiet then, the light golden and peaceful. It was when she felt closest to Thomas. On this particular October evening, Eleanor and Buddy were finishing their walk, heading back toward Maple Street. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Buddy trotted beside her, his tail wagging, occasionally sniffing at interesting spots on the sidewalk. Eleanor didn't notice the beat-up sedan following them slowly. Didn't see the 3 men inside watching her carefully. She was thinking about what to make for dinner, whether she should call her daughter tonight or wait until Sunday. She turned onto Maple Street, where the houses spread out more, separated by large yards and old trees. Her house was the third one from the corner, a small blue Craftsman with white trim and Thomas's carefully tended garden, which she maintained as best she could. Eleanor was fumbling with her keys when she heard footsteps behind her, moving fast. She turned just as 3 young men rushed up her driveway. They were in their 20s, wearing hoodies and jeans. 2 were white, 1 was Hispanic. Their faces were thin and hard, with the desperate look of people who'd do anything for their next fix. Buddy started barking immediately, positioning himself between Eleanor and the approaching men. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by protective aggression. "Nice and easy, Grandma," the tallest one said. He had stringy blonde hair and dead eyes. "Give us your purse and we won't hurt you." Eleanor's heart was pounding, but she tried to stay calm. She'd read that you shouldn't resist during a robbery. Just give them what they want and pray they leave. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking. "Okay, just don't hurt me." She held out her purse with trembling hands. The blonde man snatched it, immediately dumping the contents on the ground. Wallet, keys, phone, tissues, reading glasses. He grabbed the wallet and started pulling out cash. $30, he said, his voice rising with anger. "That's it? $30. That's all I have," Eleanor said. "I don't carry much cash." "What about inside?" the second man said. He was shorter, with dark hair and acne scars. She's got more inside. Old people always keep cash in their houses. I don't have much, Eleanor protested. Please, just take what's there and go. We'll decide what to take, the blonde man said. He moved toward the door. Open it. Eleanor's hands shook as she picked up her keys. Buddy was still barking, his hackles raised, showing teeth. The Hispanic man looked at the dog nervously. Shut that dog up, he said. He's just scared, Eleanor said. He won't bite, he's never bitten anyone. I said shut it up. The Hispanic man pulled out a knife, and Eleanor's blood went cold. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that someone was watching from across the street. Lieutenant Commander Julia Martinez sat in her parked car, finishing a phone call with her mother. She'd been home from her last deployment for 3 weeks, taking mandatory leave after 12 years of continuous service as a Navy SEAL. She was one of only a handful of women who'd made it through the program, and she'd proven herself in combat zones from Afghanistan to Syria. But right now, she was just visiting her hometown of Cedar Falls, staying at her late father's house while she figured out what came next. The Navy wanted her to take a training position. Her mother wanted her to retire and settle down. Julia herself wasn't sure what she wanted. She just said goodbye to her mother and was about to start her car when she noticed the scene unfolding across the street. 3 men surrounding an elderly woman. The body language was all wrong, aggressive, threatening. The woman was clearly terrified. Julia's training kicked in immediately. She assessed the situation in seconds: 3 suspects, 1 victim, 1 dog. The suspects appeared unarmed from her vantage point, but that could change. The elderly victim was vulnerable, probably couldn't run even if she got the chance. Julia reached for her phone to call 911, but then she saw the glint of metal in one suspect's hand. A knife. No time for police. They'd be too late. Julia got out of her car quietly. She was dressed in jeans and a plain black t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was 5'7", athletic but not bulky. Most people underestimated her, which was usually an advantage. She moved across the street silently, staying in the shadows, getting closer. She heard the man with the knife. Last chance, Grandma. Either you control that dog, or we put it down. Your choice. Julia saw the elderly woman's face crumble with despair. She was trying to calm the golden retriever, but the dog sensed danger and wouldn't stop barking. Please don't hurt him, the woman begged. He's all I have left. Please. Then make him shut up, the blonde man shouted. The dog wouldn't stop barking. The man with the knife took a step toward it. That's when Julia moved. She crossed the lawn in 3 silent strides. The man with the knife never saw her coming. Julia grabbed his wrist, twisted hard, and the knife clattered to the ground. She swept his legs out from under him, and he went down hard on the concrete driveway. The other 2 men spun around, shocked. Julia had already assessed them: no weapons visible, high but not completely out of it, dangerous but beatable. Run, Julia told the elderly woman calmly, not taking her eyes off the suspects. Get inside and lock the door. Call 911. Go now. The woman hesitated for just a second, then grabbed her dog's collar and stumbled toward her door. The golden retriever was still barking, but he followed his owner. The blonde man lunged at Julia. Big mistake. She sidestepped easily, used his momentum against him, and sent him crashing into the side of the house. He slumped down, dazed. The third man, the one with acne scars, was smarter. He saw his 2 friends neutralized in seconds and turned to run. I wouldn't, Julia said, her voice calm but carrying authority. He stopped, hands up. Look, lady, we don't want trouble. Then you shouldn't have threatened an elderly woman and her dog, Julia said. Now you're going to sit on the ground, hands behind your head, and wait for the police. All three of you. The man on the ground, the one who'd had the knife, was groaning, holding his arm where Julia had twisted it. You broke my wrist. No, I dislocated it, Julia corrected. There's a difference. And you should be grateful, I could have done much worse. The blond man was trying to get up, still dazed. Julia gave him a look that made him think better of it. I said stay down, she repeated. Something in her voice, the absolute certainty, the controlled power, made all three men comply. They sat on the driveway, hands behind their heads, while Julia stood guard. Sirens sounded in the distance. Someone else must have called 911, probably the elderly woman from inside the house. 2 police cars pulled up within minutes. 4 officers jumped out, hands on their weapons, until they saw the scene, 3 suspects sitting compliantly on the ground, and Julia standing calmly nearby. Ma'am, step away from the suspects, one officer commanded. Julia complied, raising her hand slightly to show she wasn't a threat. I'm Lieutenant Commander Julia Martinez, U.S. Navy. These 3 men were attempting to rob the homeowner. One was armed with a knife. She pointed to where the knife lay on the ground. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, studied Julia carefully. Navy. SEAL Team 3, Julia said simply. The officer's eyebrows rose. Can I see some ID? Julia slowly pulled out her military ID and handed it over. The officer examined it, then looked at the 3 suspects, then back at Julia. You took down 3 armed suspects by yourself. One was armed, Julia corrected. And yes. The officer actually smiled. Guess they picked the wrong neighborhood. She turned to her fellow officers. Cuff them. Read them their rights. As the suspects were being arrested, the elderly woman emerged from her house, the golden retriever still at her side. She looked shaken but unhurt. Are you all right, ma'am? The lead officer asked. Yes, thanks to her, the woman said, pointing at Julia. They were going to hurt Buddy. They were going to hurt my dog. Her voice broke. She saved us. Julia walked over to her. Up close, she could see the woman was trembling, tears streaming down her weathered face. It's okay now, Julia said gently. You're safe. They're going to jail. They were going to make me choose, the woman whispered. Between my life and Buddy's life. How could anyone be that cruel? Julia had seen cruelty in war zones around the world. But she'd learned that cruelty wasn't limited to combat. Sometimes the worst human behavior happened right here at home, in quiet neighborhoods, to vulnerable people who couldn't defend themselves. They're cowards, Julia said firmly. And cowards always lose in the end. The woman looked up at her with watery blue eyes. I'm Eleanor. Eleanor Price. Julia Martinez, Julia said, shaking her hand gently. You're a soldier. Navy SEAL. Eleanor's eyes widened. A woman SEAL. I didn't know there were women SEALs. There aren't many, Julia admitted. But there are a few of us. Thank God you were here, Eleanor said. Thank God you saw what was happening. The lead officer came over. Mrs. Price, I'm Sergeant Linda Hayes. We're going to need statements from both of you. Are you up for that tonight, or would you prefer to come to the station tomorrow? Tonight, Eleanor said firmly. I want to do it now, while it's fresh. I want to make sure those men go to prison. Over the next hour, Julia and Eleanor gave their statements. The suspects were identified as local drug users with previous arrests for theft and assault. The knife was photographed and bagged as evidence. The security camera footage from Eleanor's front door captured the entire incident. By the time the police finished, it was dark. Julia walked Eleanor to her door. Will you be okay here tonight? Julia asked. Do you have family you can call? My daughter in Boston, Eleanor said. But I don't want to worry her. She's always telling me to move somewhere safer. She looked at her house, at the life she built here with Thomas, at all the memories contained in those walls. But this is my home. I understand, Julia said. She did understand. Home was worth fighting for. Would you like to come in for tea? Eleanor asked suddenly. I know it's late, but I don't think I can be alone right now. And I want to thank you properly. Julia hesitated. She usually avoided social situations. 12 years of military service had made her more comfortable with soldiers than civilians. But something about Eleanor reminded her of her own grandmother, who died while Julia was overseas. Tea sounds good, Julia said. Eleanor's house was exactly what Julia expected, comfortable, lived in, filled with decades of memories. Photos covered the walls, a young couple on their wedding day, children at various ages, grandchildren, family gatherings. A man appeared in most of the photos, his face aging from young and handsome to gray and distinguished. Thomas, Julia assumed. The most recent photo showed Thomas with the golden retriever, both of them smiling at the camera. It looked like it had been taken shortly before he died. That was taken about 3 weeks before we lost him, Eleanor said, following Julia's gaze. He was already sick, but he wanted a picture with Buddy. Said it was important. She moved into the kitchen, Buddy following faithfully. Julia sat at the small kitchen table while Eleanor prepared tea with shaking hands. The adrenaline was wearing off now, and the reality of what had almost happened was sinking in. Here, Julia said gently, standing up. Let me help. Together, they prepared tea and sat down at the table. Buddy lay at Eleanor's feet, his head resting on her shoe. I keep replaying it in my mind, Eleanor said quietly. What if you hadn't been there? What if they'd broken in? What if they'd hurt Buddy? She looked down at the dog. People think I'm silly, caring so much about a dog. But he's not just a dog. He's the last piece of Thomas the First have left. You're not silly, Julia said firmly. Buddy is family. Anyone who doesn't understand that doesn't matter. Eleanor looked at her gratefully. Were you really a Navy SEAL? Still am, technically, Julia said. I'm on leave, trying to decide if I'm going to re-up or retire. How long have you served? 12 years. I joined when I was 22. That's a long time to be at war, Eleanor observed. Julia nodded. It was exactly the right thing to say, not thanking her for her service, not asking if she'd killed anyone, not treating her like either a hero or a curiosity. Just acknowledging the weight of 12 years in combat zones. I grew up here in Cedar Falls, Julia said. My father died 5 years ago. My mother still lives here. I'm staying at my dad's old house while I figure out what's next. What was your father's name? Richard Martinez. He was a firefighter here for 30 years. Eleanor's face lit up. I remember Richard. Lovely man. He helped put out a kitchen fire at our house about 20 years ago. Wouldn't leave until he'd made sure we were okay. Her expression grew sad. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. I'm sorry for yours too. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, two people who understood loss, who'd both fought their own battles. Can I ask you something? Eleanor said. Those men tonight, you stopped them so easily. They never had a chance. How did you learn to do that? Julia considered her answer. Training. Thousands of hours of training. SEALs are taught to assess threats instantly, respond with appropriate force, and neutralize danger with minimal risk to innocence. It becomes instinct after a while. Were you scared? Eleanor asked. No, Julia admitted. I've faced much worse threats. Those men were desperate drug addicts, not trained fighters. They were dangerous to you, but not to me. I was terrified, Eleanor said quietly. I've lived in Cedar Falls my whole life. It used to be safe. But now. She gestured helplessly. Break-ins, robberies, drugs. It's like the town is dying, and no one knows how to save it. Julia had seen this pattern before, in small towns across America. Economic decline leading to desperation, desperation leading to drugs, drugs leading to crime. It was a cycle that seemed impossible to break. The police are doing their best, Eleanor continued. But they're overwhelmed. And people like me, we're easy targets. Old, living alone, can't fight back. She looked at Julia. Until tonight, I was starting to think about leaving. Selling the house, moving near my daughter. Giving up. And now? Julia asked. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Now I'm angry. Those men tried to make me choose between my life and Buddy's life. They tried to make me feel helpless and afraid. And I won't let them win. This is my home. Thomas and I built a life here. I'm not abandoning it because of a few cowards. Julia felt a surge of respect for this elderly woman. Eleanor had every reason to be traumatized, to give up, to leave. But instead, she was choosing to fight back in her own way, by refusing to be driven from her home. Good, Julia said. Don't let them win. They talked for another hour. Eleanor told stories about Thomas, their life together, their children and grandchildren. Julia talked about her military career, the parts she could share, anyway. Much of her work was classified, but she could talk about the camaraderie, the purpose, the sense of serving something larger than herself. When Julia finally stood to leave, Eleanor walked her to the door. Thank you, she said. Not just for tonight, but for listening. For treating me like a person, not just a victim. You were never just a victim, Julia said. You're a survivor. There's a difference. As Julia walked back to her car, she noticed a few neighbors had come out, standing on their porches, watching. Word had spread about the attempted robbery. One older man nodded to her as she passed. A woman gave her a small wave. Julia got in her car and sat for a moment before starting it. She'd come to Cedar Falls planning to rest, to figure out her future, to escape the intensity of military life. Instead, she'd walked right into a situation that needed exactly her particular skills. Maybe that wasn't a coincidence. Maybe the universe was trying to tell her something. Over the next few days, Julia couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor and the attempted robbery. She called to check on her. Eleanor was doing better, though she was sleeping poorly and jumping at every noise. Her daughter had called, frantic with worry, but Eleanor had reassured her she was fine and wasn't ready to leave Cedar Falls. Julia also started paying more attention to the town. She'd grown up here, but she'd been gone for 12 years. She saw it now with fresh eyes, and what she saw troubled her. Cedar Falls was deteriorating. Businesses were closing. The downtown area that had once been vibrant was now half empty. The people she passed on the street looked worried, tired, defeated. And there was a visible increase in petty crime, broken windows, graffiti, abandoned cars. She went to the local police station and asked to speak with Sergeant Hayes, the officer who'd responded to Eleanor's call. Hayes agreed to meet her for coffee. I appreciate what you did for Mrs. Price, Hayes said as they sat down at a small cafe downtown. Without you there, that situation could have ended very badly. How often does this happen? Julia asked. Robberies targeting elderly residents. Hayes sighed. Too often. We've had 15 similar incidents in the past 6 months. Always the same pattern, young men, usually high on something, targeting older people living alone. They're looking for cash, jewelry, prescription medications. Anything they can sell quickly. Have you caught any of them before? A few. But they get released on bail, or they get light sentences, and they're back on the streets within weeks. The system's overwhelmed. Judges are dealing with so many cases, they don't have time to properly handle each one. And our department is understaffed, we have 12 officers for a town of 8,000. We're barely keeping up with emergency calls, let alone doing proactive policing. What about community programs? Julia asked. Neighborhood watch, things like that. We've tried, Hayes said. But people are scared. They don't want to get involved. And honestly, I don't blame them. These aren't just petty thieves, some of them are violent. Desperate people do desperate things. Julia thought about this. What if there was another way? What if the community had better tools to protect themselves? Hayes looked at her curiously. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that a decorated Navy SEAL with time on her hands could teach self-defense classes, Julia said. Specifically for vulnerable populations, seniors, women living alone, anyone who feels unsafe. Not to turn them into fighters, but to give them confidence and basic skills. Hayes' eyes lit up. That's actually a brilliant idea. We don't have the budget for that kind of program, but if you were willing to volunteer. I am, Julia said. And just like that, Julia Martinez found her purpose. She started with Eleanor. Julia visited her a few days after the robbery and proposed the idea. I can't fight, Eleanor protested. I'm 72 years old with arthritis. You don't need to fight, Julia said. You need to know how to create opportunities to escape. How to recognize danger before it's too late. How to use what you have, your voice, your environment, even Buddy, to protect yourself. Eleanor considered this. Would other people join? I think so. Sergeant Hayes said she'd help me organize it. We could hold classes at the community center. Then yes, Eleanor said. I want to learn. I never want to feel that helpless again. Julia put up flyers around town, free self-defense classes for seniors and women. Taught by Navy SEAL. Thursdays at 6 p.m., Community Center. She expected maybe 10 people to show up to the first class. 32 came. They ranged in age from 58 to 84. Most were women, but a few elderly men attended too. All of them had the same look in their eyes, fear, but also determination. They were tired of being victims. Julia started with the basics. Situational awareness. Recognizing threats. Creating distance. Using your voice. Simple moves that could create opportunities to escape, how to break a wrist grab, how to use keys as a weapon, how to fall safely if pushed. The goal isn't to fight, Julia explained. The goal is to survive. You're not trying to win a battle. You're trying to create a chance to run, to get help, to stay alive. Eleanor was her star student. She paid attention, asked smart questions, and practiced diligently. Other participants looked to her as an example. If this elderly woman who'd survived an actual attack could learn these skills, so could they. But Julia also noticed something else happening. The classes were becoming more than just self-defense training. They were becoming a community. People who'd been isolated, living in fear, were connecting with each other. They were sharing stories, supporting each other, building networks. After the third week, Eleanor approached Julia with an idea. What if we formalized this? Created an actual neighborhood watch program, but focused specifically on protecting vulnerable residents. People could check on each other, walk together, have emergency contact lists. That's a great idea, Julia said. Want to help me organize it? Eleanor smiled, the first real smile Julia had seen from her. I'd be honored. Over the next month, something remarkable happened in Cedar Falls. The self-defense classes grew to 50 regular participants. A formal neighborhood watch program was established, with Eleanor as one of the organizers. People started looking out for each other, checking on elderly neighbors, walking together in the evenings, reporting suspicious activity. And crime started to drop. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The would-be criminals who'd been targeting vulnerable residents found it harder to identify isolated victims. People were more alert, more connected, more prepared. Julia felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose outside the military. She'd spent 12 years fighting enemies overseas. Now she was fighting a different battle, helping her community protect itself, empowering vulnerable people to stand strong. But she was about to learn that not everyone appreciated what she was doing. And the real fight was just beginning. The trouble started 6 weeks after Julia began teaching the self-defense classes. She was at the community center, leading a session on how to escape from a bear hug, when Sergeant Hayes pulled her aside. "We need to talk," Hayes said quietly. "Privately." They stepped into the hallway. Hayes looked troubled. "What's wrong?" Julia asked. "The 3 men who attacked Eleanor Price, they posted bail yesterday." Julia felt her jaw tighten. "Already? It's only been 6 weeks. Overcrowded jails, overburdened courts," Hayes said. Their lawyer argued they were low-level offenders, first-time violent offense, low flight risk. Judge set bail at $5,000 each. Someone posted it. Who? We don't know. Anonymous bail bondsman transaction. But Julia. Hayes hesitated. There's more. They're making threats. Specifically about you and Eleanor. Nothing explicit enough to violate their bail conditions, but the intent is clear. They want revenge. Julia had expected this. Cowards like those 3 men didn't take humiliation well. They'd been taken down by a woman, arrested, charged with multiple felonies. Of course they wanted revenge. Has Eleanor been told? Julia asked. Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. She's going to be terrified. She should be informed, Julia said. But I'll be there when you tell her. And I'll make sure she has protection. That evening, Julia and Hayes visited Eleanor together. As expected, Eleanor went pale when she heard the news. They're out, she whispered. Already? With conditions, Hayes explained. They can't come within 500 feet of you. They have to wear ankle monitors. They have court dates next month. But they're free, Eleanor said. Free to walk around, to plan, to. She looked at Buddy, who was lying at her feet. They said they'd kill him. They said it right to my face. What's to stop them now? I am, Julia said firmly. Eleanor, I'm not going to let anything happen to you or Buddy. I promise you that. You can't watch me 24 hours a day, Eleanor said. You have your own life. Actually, I don't, Julia said. She'd been thinking about this for weeks. I'm on terminal leave from the Navy. I've decided not to re-up. Which means I'm unemployed and living in my father's empty house. I have plenty of time to make sure you're safe. I can't ask you to do that, Eleanor protested. You're not asking. I'm offering. Julia pulled out her phone. And I'm calling a few friends who might be able to help. Those friends were 3 former Navy SEALs who lived within driving distance, men Julia had served with, who'd left the military and were now working as security consultants. She explained the situation, and all 3 agreed to help without hesitation. We protect our own, her friend Marcus said. And anyone you care about is our own. Over the next few days, Julia and her friends set up a security system around Eleanor's house. Motion sensors, additional cameras, reinforced locks. They created a rotation schedule to keep watch on the house, especially at night. And they taught Eleanor how to use a personal alarm system that would immediately alert both the police and Julia if activated. But Julia knew defensive measures weren't enough. She needed to send a clear message to those 3 men, and to anyone else who might be thinking about targeting vulnerable residents of Cedar Falls. She started by visiting the apartment where the 3 suspects were staying, together, in violation of their bail conditions which prohibited them from associating with co-defendants. Julia documented this with photos and reported it to Hayes, but she knew the wheels of justice moved slowly. So she took a more direct approach. One evening, she waited outside the building until all three men left together, heading toward a known drug house on the edge of town. She followed at a distance, then intercepted them in a dark parking lot. "Gentlemen," she said, stepping out of the shadows. All three men froze. Recognition and fear flashed across their faces. "You, the blonde one," Danny said. "What do you want?" "To deliver a message," Julia said calmly. "Stay away from Eleanor Price. Stay away from her house. Stay away from anyone in the neighborhood watch program. If I even hear you've driven past her street, I will make your lives very difficult." "You threatening us?" the one with acne scars, Kyle, asked, trying to sound tough but failing. "Not a threat. A promise." Julia stepped closer. "You three made a big mistake targeting Eleanor. You thought she was weak, helpless, an easy victim. You were wrong. And now you're going to spend years in prison, because I'm going to personally make sure every piece of evidence against you is airtight, every witness shows up to court, and the prosecutor knows exactly how serious your crimes were." "We got rights," Danny said. "You can't harass us." "I'm not harassing you. I'm warning you. There's a difference." Julia's voice was ice cold. "You have one chance to do the smart thing here. Take whatever plea deal the prosecutor offers, serve your time quietly, and stay far away from Cedar Falls when you get out. Or you can keep making stupid decisions, and I guarantee you'll regret it." The Hispanic one, Marco, was the smartest of the three. "We hear you," he said, pulling the other two away. "We hear you. We'll stay away." "Good," Julia said. "Because if you don't, what I did to you that night at Eleanor's house will seem gentle compared to what comes next." She let them leave, knowing the message had landed. But she also knew desperate men sometimes did stupid things. She couldn't let her guard down. What Julia didn't know was that someone else had been watching this confrontation. Someone who was about to make everything more complicated. The next morning, Julia received a visit from a man who introduced himself as Robert Vance, the three suspects' defense attorney. He was in his 40s, expensively dressed, with the polished look of someone who made good money defending bad people. "Ms. Martinez," he said smoothly. "Or should I say Lieutenant Commander Martinez? I need to speak with you about your interactions with my clients." "I have nothing to say to you," Julia said. "You confronted my clients last night in a parking lot. You threatened them. That could be construed as witness intimidation. I delivered a warning about staying away from their victim. That's not intimidation, it's common sense. My clients feel threatened by your presence in Cedar Falls," Vance continued. "They're considering filing a restraining order against you." Julia actually laughed. "Your clients attacked a 72-year-old woman and threatened to kill her dog. They're out on bail despite committing multiple felonies. And they feel threatened by me? Good. They should. Ms. Martinez, I understand you're a decorated veteran with an impressive service record. But that doesn't give you the right to take the law into your own hands. Vigilantism is still illegal, even when it's motivated by good intentions." "I'm not a vigilante," Julia said firmly. "I'm a concerned citizen who stopped a crime in progress and is now helping to ensure the victim's safety. Everything I've done has been legal." "We'll see about that," Vance said. "My clients have rights, Ms. Martinez. And I'm going to make sure those rights are protected." After Vance left, Julia called Sergeant Hayes. "We might have a problem." She explained the situation. Hayes sighed. "I was afraid of this. Vance is a good lawyer, too good. He's gotten multiple violent offenders released on technicalities. If he's involved, this case just got a lot harder to prosecute." "What about the bail violations?" Julia asked. "They're living together, associating with each other. That clearly violates their conditions. We're documenting it, Hayes said. But we need to catch them in the act, with evidence that will hold up in court. Until then, our hands are tied. Julia felt frustration building. She'd spent 12 years fighting enemies who didn't hide behind lawyers and technicalities. This kind of battle, fought in courtrooms and through legal maneuvers, was foreign to her. But she was learning. And she was adapting. That evening, at the self-defense class, Julia noticed the energy had changed. People were nervous, whispering in corners. When she asked what was wrong, Eleanor spoke up. Word's gotten around that those men are out on bail, she said. People are scared. Some are talking about dropping out of the classes, going back to staying inside, not drawing attention. That's exactly what they want, Julia said. They want you afraid. They want you isolated. Because isolated, scared people are easy victims. She looked around at the 50 people gathered in the community center, people who'd been finding their courage, building their confidence, creating a community of protection and support. Listen to me, Julia said, her voice carrying authority. I've fought in war zones around the world. I've faced enemies who wanted to kill me and everyone I served with. And you know what I learned? Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Those 3 men are cowards. They target the vulnerable because they can't face anyone who fights back. But you're not vulnerable anymore. You've learned skills. You've built connections. You've created a community that looks out for each other. Don't let them take that away from you. An elderly man in the back, a Korean War veteran named Frank, stood up. She's right. I didn't survive 2 years in Korea just to be scared of some punk drug addicts. I'm not quitting these classes. Others nodded, standing up one by one. Eleanor stood with them, her jaw set. Neither am I. This is our town. Our home. We're not giving it up without a fight. The mood shifted. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with determination. These people had been victims before. They were choosing not to be victims anymore. But as Julia looked around at their faces, good people, vulnerable people, people who were trying so hard to be brave, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She'd promised to protect them. She'd given them courage and tools. But she knew the real test was coming. And when it came, she'd need to be ready. The confrontation came 2 weeks later, on a cold November evening. Julia was at Eleanor's house, having dinner with her as she did several times a week. They'd become genuine friends, bonding over their shared experiences with loss, service, and fighting back against fear. Buddy was lying under the table, his head resting on Julia's foot. He'd adopted Julia as part of his pack, sensing that she was someone who protected his beloved Eleanor. They were washing dishes when Julia's phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus, one of the SEALs helping with security, 3 suspects heading toward Maple Street. Danny, Kyle, and Marco. All in the same car. Looks like they're planning something. Julia felt her body shift into combat mode, senses heightening, mind clearing, instincts taking over. Eleanor, she said calmly. I need you to go upstairs to your bedroom with Buddy. Lock the door. Take your phone and the personal alarm. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Eleanor had been through enough by now to recognize that tone. She didn't argue. She grabbed Buddy's collar and headed for the stairs. Julia, she said, pausing halfway up. Be careful. Please. Always, Julia said. She sent a quick text to Marcus, on site at Eleanor's. Call Hayes. Get back up here ASAP. Then she moved to the front window and looked out. A beat-up sedan was parked down the street, lights off. 3 figures sat inside, watching the house. Julia considered her options. She could wait for police backup, Hayes would have officers here within minutes. But these 3 men were unpredictable, high on drugs, and angry. They might do something stupid before backup arrived. Or Julia could take control of the situation. She made her decision. She walked out the front door, standing under the porch light where they could see her clearly. Then she started walking toward their car. The three men saw her coming. She could see them arguing inside the car, Danny wanting to drive away, Marco trying to calm him down, Kyle looking panicked. Julia walked right up to the driver's side window and knocked. Danny rolled it down, trying to look tough. "What do you want?" "I want to know what you three idiots are doing parked on this street, in violation of your bail conditions, 500 feet from a woman you're prohibited from contacting." "We're not doing anything," Danny said. "Just sitting here." "That's not illegal." "Actually, it is," Julia said. "This is harassment. Intimidation of a witness. Violating a protective order." "Want me to keep going?" "We got rights," Kyle said from the back seat. "You have the right to remain silent," Julia agreed. "I suggest you use it. You think you're tough?" Danny said, his voice rising. "You think you can keep protecting that old lady forever? We know where she lives. We know her schedule. We know she's alone most of the time. Eventually, you won't be there. And then? And then what?" Julia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You'll what, Danny? Attack a 72-year-old woman? Hurt her dog? Make yourself feel like a big man?" "Maybe we will," Danny said, high on something and too stupid to know when to shut up. "Maybe we'll." He didn't get to finish. Julia heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching fast. Police cars with lights flashing pulled up, surrounding the sedan. Sergeant Hayes got out, along with 4 other officers. "Out of the vehicle," Hayes commanded. "Hands where we can see them." The 3 men complied, realizing too late that they'd been caught. Marcus pulled up in his truck, having called in the backup and guided them to the location. Hayes walked over to Julia. "Good work. Between what they just said and the fact that they're here in violation of their bail conditions, we've got them dead to rights. Make sure their lawyer hears exactly what Danny said," Julia said. "Every word. That was a direct threat against Eleanor." "Oh, I will," Hayes promised. "And this time, they're not getting bail." As the 3 men were arrested again, Danny looked at Julia with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Julia replied calmly. "You just threatened a witness while violating your bail conditions, in front of multiple police officers. Your lawyer can't save you from your own stupidity. You're going to prison, Danny. For years. And when you get out, if you ever come near Cedar Falls again, I'll be waiting." The men were led away. Julia went back into Eleanor's house and called up the stairs. "All clear. You can come down." Eleanor came down slowly, Buddy at her side. "Is it really over?" she asked. "For now," Julia said. "They violated their bail. They'll be held without bail until trial, and with the direct threat Danny made tonight, the prosecutor has a much stronger case. They're going away for a long time." Eleanor sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared. When you went out there alone to face them, I thought." "I know," Julia said gently. "But I wasn't alone. I had backup on the way. And I had you and Buddy safe inside. I wouldn't have risked it otherwise." Over the next months, the case against the 3 men proceeded through the courts. Robert Vance tried every trick he knew, but the evidence was overwhelming. Eleanor testified with strength and dignity. Julia's testimony was clear and unshakable. And the threat Danny had made, caught on the body cameras of multiple police officers, sealed their fate. All 3 men took plea deals rather than face trial. Danny got 8 years. Kyle got 6. Marco, who'd shown some remorse and cooperated with prosecutors about their drug suppliers, got 4 years. The day the sentences were announced, Eleanor called Julia, crying with relief. "It's really over. They're really going to prison." "They are," Julia confirmed. "And you're safe. Cedar Falls is safer." But Julia had learned something important during these months. The 3 men who'd attacked Eleanor were symptoms of a larger problem. Cedar Falls was struggling with poverty, drug addiction, lack of opportunity. More desperate people would come. More vulnerable residents would be targeted. The self-defense classes were helping. The Neighborhood Watch program was making a difference. But it wasn't enough. So Julia did something she'd been considering for months. She started a non-profit organization called Shields Up. The mission was simple: empower vulnerable communities to protect themselves through training, technology, and community building. She recruited her SEAL friends to help teach classes. She partnered with local law enforcement to create better reporting systems. She raised money to install security systems in the homes of elderly residents who couldn't afford them. She organized walking groups, check-in systems, emergency response networks. Eleanor became the organization's first volunteer coordinator, using her connections in the community to identify people who needed help and organize support systems. Within a year, Shields Up had expanded to 3 neighboring towns. Crime rates were dropping. Vulnerable residents felt safer. Communities were coming together. Julia found herself featured in news articles and on TV programs, always uncomfortable with the attention but understanding it helped the cause. She was interviewed about being a female Navy SEAL, about transitioning from military to civilian life, about finding purpose after service. "People thank me for my military service," Julia told one interviewer. "But honestly, I think this work, helping communities protect themselves, might be more important. I fought enemies overseas for 12 years. Now I'm fighting a different kind of enemy here at home, the fear and isolation that makes people vulnerable to predators." 2 years after that night at Eleanor's house, Julia stood in a community center with over 200 people, students from the self-defense classes, volunteers from the Neighborhood Watch program, supporters of Shields Up, and local officials including Sergeant Hayes. They were celebrating the organization's 2nd anniversary and honoring Eleanor, who was receiving an award for her volunteer work. Eleanor, now 74, stood at the podium with Buddy at her side. The dog was older now, moving a little slower, but still devoted to his person. 2 years ago, Eleanor said, her voice steady, 3 men tried to make me choose between my life and my dog's life. They thought I was weak. Helpless. An easy victim. And maybe I was, then. But I'm not anymore. None of us are. Because of Julia Martinez, because of Shields Up, because of all the people in this room who chose to stand together instead of living in fear, we've changed. We've become protectors instead of victims. We've become a community. She looked at Julia. When Julia stopped those men from hurting Buddy and me, she saved more than just 2 lives. She saved my hope. My belief that good people exist, that courage matters, that one person really can make a difference. Eleanor held up her award, a plaque with the Shields Up logo. "This isn't really my award. It belongs to all of us. To every person who took a self-defense class even though they were scared. To every neighbor who checked on someone living alone. To every volunteer who gave their time to make someone else feel safer. We did this together." The room erupted in applause. Julia felt tears in her eyes, something that rarely happened. She'd received medals for combat actions, commendations from military leaders, recognition from politicians. But this moment, seeing Eleanor stand strong and confident, seeing this community transformed from fearful to empowered, this meant more than any medal ever could. After the ceremony, Julia and Eleanor stood outside the community center, watching the sun set over Cedar Falls. Buddy lay at their feet, content. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly. "For everything. For saving me that night. For teaching me to be strong. For giving me purpose again. You gave yourself purpose, Julia corrected. I just opened a door. You walked through it. Will you stay in Cedar Falls? Eleanor asked. Keep running, shields up. Julia nodded. This is home. This is where I'm needed. I spent 12 years serving my country overseas. Now I'm serving it here, in a different way. And honestly, I think this might be exactly what I was meant to do. They stood in comfortable silence, two women who'd become unlikely friends, who'd faced fear together and come out stronger. Buddy suddenly lifted his head, looking at something in the distance. Julia's hand moved instinctively to her side, combat reflexes still sharp. But it was just a jogger passing by, waving hello. Eleanor noticed Julia's reaction and smiled. You're always ready, aren't you? Always watching. Occupational habit, Julia said. 12 years as a SEAL, you don't really turn it off. I'm glad you don't, Eleanor said. Because people like you, people who see threats before they happen, who step in when others run away, who protect those who can't protect themselves, you're what stands between civilization and chaos. That's a bit dramatic, Julia said with a smile. Is it? Eleanor asked. Those 3 men who attacked me, they were chaos. They were violence and cruelty and selfishness. You were civilization. You were order and protection and selfless courage. And you won. Julia thought about this. About the thin line between order and chaos, safety and danger. About how that line was maintained not by laws or institutions, but by individuals willing to stand up, to intervene, to say, not on my watch. We all won, Julia said. You, me, this community. We chose to stand together instead of live in fear. That's what makes the difference. As they walked back to their cars, Julia insisting on following Eleanor home as always, Julia thought about the path that had led her here. 12 years in the Navy SEALs. The loss of her father. The decision to come home. The random chance of being across the street when Eleanor was attacked. Random chance. Or maybe something more. Maybe exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The thugs had made a widow choose between her life and her dog, not knowing a Navy SEAL was watching. They'd paid the price for their cruelty and their stupidity. But more importantly, they'd unknowingly set in motion something larger, a movement, a transformation, a community choosing strength over fear. And at the center of it all was Julia Martinez, former Navy SEAL, current protector of the vulnerable, always watching, always ready. Because some people talk about making the world better. And some people actually do it, one person at a time, one community at a time, one act of courage at a time. Julia Martinez was the latter. And Cedar Falls was safer because of it.